Good morning. There are two concerns for New Jersey coming out of the next 4 days of weather. The immediate threat is for severe flooding on Friday and Saturday. The second is tracking the path of Hurricane Joaquin as those forecasts become clearer over the next 24 to 72 hours. So first, let's be clear. At this point, it's just too soon to say with any certainty whether or not Joaquin is likely to have a direct impact on New Jersey or not. Those paths have changed a number of times, as you've seen, over the course of the last 48 hours. And so we'll have greater degrees of certainty as the hours pass, and we prepare ourselves for what those paths will tell us over the course of that time. But whether or not Joaquin is a direct issue for New Jersey by Monday, we know that there is definitely going to be moderate and likely to be major flooding events in South Jersey on Friday and Saturday, with 5 to 6 inches of rainfall expected to come over those 2 days. At particular risk are communities along the Delaware Bay, in Salem and Cumberland counties, and the coastal communities in Atlantic and Cape May counties. So as a result, I've signed an executive order declaring a state of emergency in New Jersey as of this morning, giving our emergency management folks the tools they're going to need to ensure a speedy and an orderly response. I've been involved in conference calls with Cabinet beginning day before yesterday, had another one last night at 10 o'clock, and I want to review with you what the current set of plans are, department by department. For the New Jersey Office of Emergency Management, the State Emergency Operations Center was activated at 6 a.m. this morning to monitor the storm, and it will remain open as long as necessary to meet the anticipated challenging conditions throughout the state, but particularly in the southern part of the state as of now. Currently, the OEM is monitoring the weather situation, with our main focus being on preparedness for the storm, and I'll get back to that in a second. NJDOT is inspecting and cleaning drainage systems. They've activated all emergency operations centers, testing the communication systems and topping off fuel supplies. In addition, they've planned emergency contractors. They've been put on alert to effect emergency repairs if needed and pre-positioned debris removal equipment if necessary. DOT Operations Division has the ability to utilize more than 700 people in more than 65 crews with more than 500 pieces of heavy equipment to respond to the storm. Those are being pre-positioned as we speak to the areas most likely to be affected and will be ready to go when the effects of the storms begin to be felt. The New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection has assessed which beaches are most vulnerable. It's reached out to those towns to ask if they need assistance from the state to move sand around or if they need additional sand to be placed on those beaches. We've contacted all water supply and wastewater facilities to make sure they have emergency plans at the ready and backup power on site, generators, and fuel to run those generators. As of this morning, no rivers are forecast to go to flood stage, but we'll continue to monitor as the weekend forecast becomes more certain as to rivers. The New Jersey Board of Public Utilities has been in active discussion with PSE&G, JCP&L, and Atlantic City Electric and their leadership to ensure that their companies are preparing for the storm. Mutual aid requests have already gone out from these companies to other states in preparation for what we're going to be dealing with in the southern part of the state for certain and what we may be dealing with throughout the state. For most vulnerable folks in our society, the Department of Health has reached out to hospitals, our federally qualified health clinics, our long-term care facilities, and our dialysis centers to update them on the latest storm projections, remind them to get their emergency staffing plans in place, and are set up for regular updates via conference calls from the State Department of Health. The Department of Human Services has spoken to their facility managers and the CEOs of the private facilities. They've all been notified to plan for the weather, which puts in motion emergency staffing requirements and food and medical protocols. Our Office of Homeland Security and the state police are working in partnership to ensure proper staging and availability of commodities regionally throughout the state. I ordered last night that we elevate our preparedness to a 20-day supply of commodities from a 5-day supply, and I ordered last night that those commodities be pre-positioned at armories and most particularly that they be pre-positioned today in Atlantic, Cape May, Cumberland, and Salem counties so that we could deliver those as necessary beginning tomorrow. It's important to note for all the residents that they have to stay informed and continue to watch the news, listen on the radio, take precautions and for any of the eventual weather scenarios. They always can go to the OEM's website at ready.nj.gov. That's ready.nj.gov. A few other things. The team that you see standing behind me and the others who they represent are prepared for this. Many of us have been through this before with Irene and with Sandy. Right now, the weather reports are not encouraging. I will consider evacuations if necessary. Right now, we don't have a good enough handle on this from the storm tracking to be able to tell whether evacuations are being necessary, but slosh modeling is being done by DEP and the Office of Emergency Management as we speak in conjunction with the National Weather Service to determine the inundation of water in various areas. And if I believe that evacuations are necessary in the southern part of the state, I will order them at the moment that I believe they become necessary. Folks should also know that we are making plans for sheltering if sheltering is necessary, not only working with the localities and the counties who have sheltering facilities already available, but also with statewide sheltering with Rutgers University and Rowan University to make sure that if those facilities are needed, that they're already beginning preparation for that as well. We also are going to make sure that everyone understands what they need to do to be prepared. So if you have a generator, make sure that you go onto our emergency management website to remind yourself about the safe operation of those generators. We had a number of deaths after Sandy based upon improper utilization of generators that caused carbon monoxide poisoning. We don't want to see that again, and there are instructions on our website to be able to deal with that. Get supplies that you need in. Do the things that you would normally do, especially I'm now speaking to our folks in the southern part of the state. In Atlantic, Cape May, Cumberland, and Salem counties, I need all of you to begin to prepare today. Rain is going to come later today in the southern part of the state, and that rain is going to be intense and continue through Friday. Now is the time for you to begin to prepare for hunkering down and dealing with the storm. If an evacuation is necessary, as I said, we will give you as much advance notice of the need for evacuation as we possibly can. The last thing I'll say before I take questions is that, you know, we are not quite yet sure about whether this is going to be a single punch or a double punch. There's no question there's going to be a single punch that is going to start this evening, and there are going to be winds up to 75 to 85 miles an hour in the southern part of the state, in addition to the rain, which we expect to be 5 to 6 inches. Those are nor'easter type conditions, and everyone for that can, you know, cause not only flooding but also the type of interruption of power and other services that we need to be paying attention to, and you all in the public need to be prepared to deal with that in the same way that we'll be prepared to deal with it as well. But for our citizens in those 4 southern counties, that preparation needs to start now. For the folks in the other 17 counties in the state, we need you to stay tuned. When we have more information, which I'm sure we will later today, we'll be able to get you the information you need to make the preparations that you need to make for yourself and for your family. You need to understand that we're prepared, and we need you to prepare and not panic. Now, I understand that this is a state that's been traumatized by the second worst natural disaster in American history not quite 3 years ago. And I understand that there will be people who, when they start to hear this news, will feel an enormous amount of stress over the possibility that something severe could happen to the state again. 2 things you need to know about that. One, there's nothing we can do to control it. And worrying and stressing about it will not change the path of the storm. Secondly, you need to know that the state is prepared to deal with whatever we need to deal with depending upon the path of the storm. And I need all of you to be able to do the things you need to do to protect yourselves and your families. And so go to ready.nj.gov. Make sure you go to the website to remind yourself of the things that we all learned 3 years ago. And we're prepared. The team behind me and the folks they represent are prepared. And we'll continue to keep everybody informed as is necessary. But I will be here. The Lieutenant Governor will be here. We'll be traveling throughout the state, and we'll have more things to tell you over the course of the next number of hours and days. But that's the best information we have at the moment. I'd be happy to take your questions. Phil?
Cape County, particularly high percentage of low-lying areas there. Does that really exacerbate the flood risk?
It does. It does, and that's why we're doing the slosh modeling now, Phil. And for those of you who don't remember from 3 years ago, the slosh modeling, it is us taking the forecasts, interacting that with our maps and the various topography of the state to see how far inland we think water could get based upon flooding and storm surge. So we're doing that modeling now, along with the National Weather Service, and that will have a large part, Phil, in determining whether or not in areas in Cape May and Atlantic and maybe in Cumberland, Salem, where we might have to order some evacuations. We're not there yet, and if we are going to be there, my guess is we'd be there in the next 12 to 24 hours, and we'll let people know.
Well, if I may, there's severe breaks in the plans for the contiguous barrier with the Dune project. How much concern is that?
Well, listen, I hope people understand now why I've been as assertive and at times as angry as I've been at some of the selfish opposition to dune building in this state, which has caused delays in the project. So the folks in Margate today, who are now in the eye of this flooding, I wonder if they think it was a smart move to be fighting doing this. I wonder if the folks in Bay Head and Point Pleasant think it was a smart move now to be fighting the dunes. And so the breaks in there, some of that are just the basis, Phil, of federal funding and the bidding process and all the rest. But some clearly have been delayed because we've had to go to court and have eminent domain fights with people who are more concerned about their view than they're concerned about the safety of themselves and their neighbors. And so, again, I hope that folks understand, when I've been as assertive about this as I have over time, not only in terms of my language, but in terms of the legal steps we've taken, this is why. And the fact that we don't have all this done by now is not completely, but in large measure because we've had to have these legal fights along the way rather than people, as the overwhelming majority of people in the state did, was to give voluntary easements. And so, yeah, it's a concern. But DEP is working as we speak to move sand and to add sand in places where we can be helpful to try to take care of those issues.
Is there a greater sense of security, Governor, in the town where a lot of the work has been done, like some sections of the barrier island?
Sure. Yeah, no question there is. I mean, listen, those folks are safer and more secure because of the work that's already been done. And so, yeah, but again, we're speaking in a vacuum a bit of it, right? Because I don't know how bad it's going to be. And again, like Sandy was a two-punch, right? It was two different storms coming together. We unfortunately are doing the same thing now, right? So we have this nor'easter coming up and giving us the hit tonight and into tomorrow. The potential of Joaquin coming, Sunday, Monday. Remember, part of the problem with all that is that the back bays get filled with water now. The rivers rise with water now. So you're not just dealing with a hurricane storm surge, but you're dealing with, back bay areas at the shore, both the Delaware Bay and the Barnegat Bay, and some of the rivers, which will be fuller than they would otherwise have been because of the 5 to 6 inches of rain we're going to get in the next day and a half. So, again, if it was just Joaquin, there would be less concern potentially, depending upon the tracking. But when you have this right back to back with Joaquin, it puts an enormous pressure on the water. The only good thing is that our reservoirs are well below where they should be this time of year. And that's why we had the water warning that we issued just a week or so ago. So we're not having to worry about, usually at this time of year, our reservoirs are at anywhere from 80 to 90%. Right now, our reservoirs are somewhere in the 50 to 60% range. And so that will be somewhat helpful. That's on the positive side. So, you know, there's a bunch of different both environmental factors and then work that we've done since Sandy, which make things better. But there are some things, because of the nature of the way this storm is progressing and it being a two-step process, like Sandy was, that make it more problematic for us. Yeah, I will be in New Jersey through Tuesday. I've already canceled my schedule in New Hampshire. I was scheduled to be in New Hampshire tomorrow, and I think part of Saturday. That's already been canceled, and I'm here at least through Tuesday. Yeah, at least.
What steps is New Jersey Transit taking to protect its vehicles and what New Jersey is going to be these days?
Well, we hope normalcy for most of the state, at least in the next couple of days. Here's the only way there won't be. If we have to start to move equipment to higher areas, which we discussed last night, I discussed last night with Ronnie Hakem, and there's a plan in place to do that, that will cut back on the amount of equipment we have to move people. So there may be some delays. We don't plan on any of that right now because, as we said, most of the focus, at least for the next 48 hours, is on those 4 southern counties. But as we get a better handle on Joaquin, we're then going to have to make decisions about whether to move equipment out of where it is now and into safer areas. And if we do, that can wind up having an effect on service. The other thing, of course, is the worst thing in the world for catenary wires is high winds. And if we wind up having the 70 to 80 mile an hour winds that some are talking about, that can also affect service as well. That's less of an equipment issue than it is, you know, an issue of electric trains and they be able to operate without the catenary wires being upright. So Ronnie Hakem is prepared with a plan to move assets out into safer areas to try to prevent loss of assets. We haven't made that decision yet because we don't believe that this first part of the storm will have an effect on those assets. Joaquin could have an effect on those assets, and if it does, then we're going to move them. But if we move them, that will cause for some delays because we'll have less equipment to move people since we've moved it out. Listen, you know, there's not much we can do. I mean, you know, it depends on, you know, where the storm is and how it works. You know, we wound up having Irene and we had no effect on this. With Sandy, we had a big effect. It depends on where the storm goes. But it's not like we can close them off. I'm not going to put a door on them, you know, so, you know, we'll have to deal with what we're going to have to deal with. But at this point, to be clear, we don't have any indication yet that there's going to be any significant problems in that area of the state. It depends on the track of Joaquin more than it depends on the nor'easter that we're talking about right now.
Is there anything that, as far as preparation goes, that you did and learned from saying that you did from that preparation?
Yeah, lots of stuff. I mean, you know, I don't think we have enough time to go through all that. But, you know, Colonel Fuentes at OEM, along with Dr. Rodriguez at OHS&P, and before Ed Dixon at OHS&P, and before him, Charlie McKenna at OHS&P, who dealt with the aftermath of Irene, you know, have been working on really what's a unique kind of protocol in the aftermath of Sandy to any state in the country that we're using for the first time now, that we developed from all the different experiences we learned in Sandy. And so we're going to see how that works. But I think there's no question, listen, I'm much better prepared. The Lieutenant Governor's much better prepared. And for the folks who are up here who lived through Sandy, they're all much better prepared. And for our friends who ran Sandy with us, some of whom have gone to other parts of the government, some of whom have gone to the private sector, they all got calls from the governor yesterday telling them that they're all available for calling. And I instructed all of the folks who have predecessors who went through Sandy that in this 24-hour period, starting yesterday afternoon, that they had to call their predecessor and get downloaded directly by their predecessor about things that in retrospect they look back on and say, here are some things that we found were particularly important. And so all the cabinet members who are new to this experience standing behind me, I've had conversations 24 hours with their predecessors. Those predecessors have all been contacted directly by me to let them know that they are subject to recall from either the private sector or from other parts of government that they've embarked to. McKenna's back there already. dragged it from the SDA over to here. So building schools can stop for a couple of days, and we'll be happy to have Charlie around to help us. Claude.
Governor, do you have a sense of where we are on the berms in terms of a percentage, what percent of the goal has been met in terms of?
I know, we'll get that information to you, Claude. I don't know it off the top of my head.
And then just as a follow-up to that, do you feel like there might be any further consultation with the federal government in advance of this going?
Oh, we've already had that. Sure. I'm sorry to mention that up front. We've already had conversations with FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security, and already begun to talk to their incident folks there to be prepared. We've had conversations with the American Red Cross already, all the things that you would normally do in preparation for a hurricane. So all those conversations have already been ongoing, and if I feel the need to get on the phone with Secretary Johnson, we have a good relationship, and I'll do that. But right now it's happening at the staff level, and we feel ready.
Along those lines, I'm curious, there's always a swell after these kinds of natural disasters, a rush of people to donate blood, and then there's always a question of capacity or lack of capacity. Is that, in terms of the whole blood supply, do you know where we are as the state?
At this point, we don't have any concerns about where we are in blood supply, and if we do, we'll certainly let people know. Other questions? Yeah, Melissa? Listen, I've said, you've heard me say many times that I'm happy to consider legislation that has some common sense to it. You know, when people legally own guns in other states, and they come in here, as these folks did, and they voluntarily admit to police officers during other interactions that they carry a gun and they're carrying it legally with a license from another state, and they're arrested and face jail time for that, I think that's completely illogical. And it's not just. And if it happens, I'm going to pardon those people. Now, in the context of, Melissa, the normal consideration we do of anybody who's considered for pardon, which is we look at the rest of their background, we meet with them, we meet with their attorneys, we do the kind of checks that are needed so that there are no surprises. And so in that context, if I think something's being unjustly done based upon the inflexibility of our gun laws, then I'm going to do that, and I've done that going all the way back to 2010 with Brian Aiken. And so this is not something that's new. When these issues come up, if people, remember, people have to too. It goes through the parole board and then comes to counsel's office. And, you know, we're going to continue to do that because I just think that the application of these type of laws to those type of folks is illogical. I don't think it's what the legislature meant. And I'd be happy to consider changes to those laws that were sent to me by the legislature. Instead, all we've gotten from the legislature are ways to make New Jersey's gun laws more unreasonable rather than less. Phil?
You already mentioned that there's no need for evacuations yet. I know it's hard to predict individual responses on the part of people. During Irene, a lot of people fled to shore. During Sandy, in advance, not so much. What do you think the mindset of the government would be now?
Well, first off, I think we were pretty successful with Sandy. I mean, you know, the fact is that we had very few deaths with the second worst natural disaster in American history. Compare that to what happened with Katrina and the volume of deaths that occurred in New Orleans compared to what happened at the Jersey Shore. You know, we got, you know, over 1 million people evacuated from the New Jersey Shore during Sandy. So I disagree a bit with the premise of your question. I would say that people understand that I'm not an alarmist, and that if I order an evacuation, it's because I have hard evidence that leads me to conclude that them staying where they are puts them at great danger to their life and their health. And that's the basis by which I'll make those decisions, is the way I've always made them. Now, Irene took a turn, and we didn't have nearly as bad a situation at the Jersey Shore with Irene as we would have. And I know that there were some people, unfortunately, who were skeptical during Sandy, a few, and they either got barely out with their lives or some of them didn't get out. So, you know, what I'd say to folks in the public is, you know, I don't think I have a problem in the state anymore being taken seriously on issues like this. So I think they know I know what I'm talking about, and I know what I'm doing, and I've been through this before. And I don't remember what number emergency declaration this is for me, but many more than I ever thought I'd have to sign. So we know what we're doing here. Yep.
Governor, you mentioned the stress and fear that people will have, especially going through Irene, Hurricane Sandy, just coming out of
Yeah, probably not. Probably not. It's two different types of problems, right? We weren't worried about evacuating people. We weren't worrying about sheltering people during Pope Francis. I mean, our OEM and the state police and Office of Homeland Security and preparedness are always working on these things. So I don't think the Francis visit probably puts us in any better stead. But the good news is it doesn't put in any worse stead either. So people are working hard, and I think this is a much different situation, though, because what we'll be focusing on is, do we need to evacuate? How do we shelter? And all the rest of that, and then how do you get people returned? And we don't know what we'll be dealing with. Remember, in Irene, we had very little concern about debris removal. In Sandy, debris removal was the first thing we had to worry about just to give people access to their property again. So all of this depends upon severity of storm and what happens, but I don't think the Pope Francis thing probably helps us. Probably didn't hurt us either.
What are you doing at this stage now that you learned that you didn't have to do the first time, say, Sandy or Irene, preparation?
Well, it's hard to give you any one particular thing. What I tell you is that, you're just more prepared, right? So there are things that happened during Irene and Sandy, and I can't, as I'm standing up here, tell you specifically what, but there were some things that you just didn't anticipate, all right? So, for instance, I can give you one. In Sandy, we didn't really anticipate not having any gas stations operational. And what do? And that the gas station situation was twofold. Some, they had gas but no power to pump the gas, and some where they had power but no gas. And all the refineries were closed down, and how do we get gasoline to the refineries? And ultimately we worked with the federal government to get that done. Now, in my head, I have a checklist of things. And the folks who were on the call last night, that I ran last night, can tell you that, I can unfortunately now do this off the top of my head in terms of going through and asking them questions about, well, what about in health? What about this? In human services, what about this? In DEP, are we doing this? And Bob Martin and I, where's Bob? There he is. Bob Martin and I could go through this thing, without barely even speaking to each other, about reservoirs and, the rivers and wastewater plants and wastewater treatment plants, water plants. We've been through this before. So I think it's more just on our part, myself, the Lieutenant Governor, and some of the senior members of the Cabinet, the fact that once you've been through this, you never quite forget it. And that's why I've urged the other newer members of the Cabinet to consult with their colleagues, their predecessors. And I think that'll be a useful tool as well in terms of just getting everybody refreshed on it. But I can't think of, other than the gas stations, anything specific. I'm sure there were, but I have a pretty good checklist in my head now about how to deal with this stuff.
I can speak to two different groups of the shore. Some were panicked, some residents, because they've been so devastated by Sandy, and others who fortunately got out pretty unscathed and feel good. But for those who are so uncertain about how to deal because of the uncertainty of the storm and are looking to you for guidance, what would your message be about how they should feel about it?
I'd say be prepared, but don't panic. Now, it's easy for me to say, okay? But the fact is, that's the only advice you can give somebody like this. I understand, because I lived with this for all the time afterwards, and you'll recall, every day I was out with the public after Sandy and saw the emotional reactions of people. And so that's why I mentioned it off the top, is that I understand there are people who are going to be panicked. What I tell them is to be assured by two sets of experiences. First, their own, that as awful as it was, they're still here, and they're still standing, and they survived. Damaged, yes. Traumatized by the experience, of course, but they're here. And they've learned something, in the same way his question, implies that, I've learned something, and we've learned something from doing this, so have they. So they're not coming into this for the first time. Second thing to assure them is that I'm better, and I'm more ready. And I was pretty ready the last time. This time, after what we went through with Sandy, we're not only ready for the storm to come, but we're also much more ready for the aftermath than we ever could have been before, having gone through it. So that should give them some measure of assurance that the governor is not going to forget something. The governor is not going to forget them, and not understand how important it is for me to be present and to be working and to be understanding of those concerns and try to make sure they get the kind of help that they need. So just, I'd ask all of them just to take any of the nervous energy they have, use it to get ready.
So, is there a plan to ensure that there won't be a gas shortage if we do get impacted?
Well, again, it depends on, again, we're much better off now because we have a lot more gas stations that have generators, and we use some of the money from Sandy to be able to do that. But if there were a large-scale loss of power across the entire state like there was in Sandy, the bigger problem became the refineries stopped operating. And the state highways were impassable to be able to deliver gas, right? So some things you can prepare for and some things just are unavoidable. And the way we got around it the last time was the federal government, the Department of Defense, brought in fuel. And the National Guard distributed that fuel to gas stations that were operational. So we're prepared if that happens, but it doesn't mean there won't be an interruption. It depends, again, on the severity of the storm. Now, Sandy, let's remember, was the second worst natural disaster in American history. We are preparing for the worst, but I'm not standing up here today saying that, you know, Joaquin is going to be Sandy. We have absolutely no way of knowing that at this point. It's a Category 3 out there now. We don't know what it's going to be at landfall, and we don't know where it's going to land. So there's a lot of ifs still in this. But we're much better prepared for the worst than we could have ever been before, having gone through it, and we're very hopeful that we won't get anywhere near that. So not here to tell people Sandy 2 is coming. I have no way of knowing that. But what I want people to know is that if it did, we're as prepared as you could be to deal with it.
Is there any anticipation of spills, sewage, or refineries?
Well, we never had a problem with spills from the refineries before. And, you know, in terms of sewage, well, if all the wastewater treatment plants in the state go down, then we got a problem. And that's what happened in Sandy, and then we were dumping raw sewage into the Passaic River. That's not optimal. But it beats the alternative of where you're going to go with that sewage. So, you know, again, we've done some things to harden assets and to make them stronger and tougher in the time since then. There are more things going on that will make them even stronger going forward. But do we have any expectation of that? No. But could it happen? Sure, because we've seen it happen before. But I have no expectation of that at the moment. Remember, that was a severe and profound loss of power throughout the entire state for an extended period of time. I hope that that's not what we deal with this time. You can be guaranteed that the president of BPU hopes that's not what we're dealing with, because then he'll be, you know, hearing from me every 15 minutes. Yeah, Claude?
Two quick things. One, you said you cancel all your public campaign events. Are you canceling private events as well?
Yeah, I have one event tonight in Boston that I'm going to tonight, but I'm flying there and flying back tonight. But there were no other private events planned, and the public events that were planned have all been canceled.
And just to follow up, the police have been ready, is it ready?
You know, it's interesting. Mary Pat brought that up last night when I got off the 10 o'clock call. She goes, by the way, where the hell's that fleece? I haven't seen it in a while. I believe it's in my closet, but I have to tell you, Claude, I haven't eyeballed that baby in a while. So when I get home from Boston tonight, that's one of the things I'll be looking for. But it didn't look for it last night. Charlie?
Given your statements about the art and the nonsensical nature of the laws that got those folks in trouble, do you now support a federal law that would require all states to recognize permits from other states?
No.
Something that you
I still oppose it. And I oppose it because I believe in federalism. I believe states should have the right to make these determinations on their own. Now, you know, the fact is that there are ways that we're looking at this now, maybe to try to deal with this inside the state. And as you know, I put together a task force a number of months ago that are working on looking at the various laws that we have in the state and ways that we might be able to make it more sensible than it is now. But I don't want the federal government involved in every aspect of a state's ability to make determinations on how they should be governing themselves. And so my opposition to that has always been a philosophical opposition. That's a slippery slope. You let the federal government get into that, next thing you know, the federal government will be trying to run the whole healthcare system. Oh, wait a second, they are doing that already. I mean, you never know what they're going to try to do next. So it's a philosophical opposition on my part.
As a federal prosecutor, you went and prosecuted a
understand what you're saying.
Background check laws that, or more stringent laws that are similar to, say, what we have in New Jersey. If that was replicated nationally, that may not have.
No, they just would have. No, they just would have violated different federal laws than the ones they violated. Criminals violate laws, Charlie. And that gun dealer was knowingly violating the law by knowingly selling to straw purchasers. That was already a violation of the law. Wouldn't have mattered. Wouldn't have mattered at all. He already knew he was violating the law. He was violating the law to make money. That's why I prosecuted him. And those guns wound up killing people on the streets of New Jersey. That always has been a federal law, a federal, criminal violation during the time that I was U.S. Attorney, and I would aggressively prosecute those cases. And if I ever became U.S. Attorney again, I'd aggressively prosecute him again. It's the right thing to do. Yeah.
So, have you spoken to the president yet about store crack and
No.
how popular education standing was among Republicans? Are you
Yeah.
concerned about your needing?
Let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen me for a second, ever hear me say anything publicly, privately, or anywhere, backing away for a moment from what I did to welcome the president here on October 30th of 2000, or October 31st, 2012? Ever? No. So it's a ridiculous question. I haven't called the president because I don't need to call the president yet. I don't call the president, just go, hey, so what do you think? President of the United States is busy with a number of different things, and I have respect for the office. But I know this much. If I feel the need to call the President of the United States, I can. And I believe he'll take the call. And so, because it's both of our jobs to do our job. And if anybody should learn anything about me from the experience during Sandy, 8 days before a presidential race for a guy that I was the biggest surrogate for in the country, I'll do my job first. That's why I'm not going to New Hampshire tomorrow. And that's why I wouldn't change a thing that I did in 2012 regarding my interaction with the president. I've been pretty firm on that from the minute I did it. And there'll always be people in my party who won't like it, but they've never been governor, so they don't understand what it means to have to be here and do this job. And I'm going to do it. Anything else? Yes, madam.
Does the state know at this point how much fuel-related
You can check with Gore. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but go to Gore and they'll be able to give you those numbers. Come on. Next. Yes.
There was a bill in the legislature that required generators at gas stations. I don't think that's made it to your desk.
No, we had a bill that came to my desk that I believe I signed that that gave them funding to be able to make themselves adaptable to generators. I don't remember whether the bill requiring generators ever got to my desk or not, or maybe I might have vetoed it because I thought it was ridiculous because small gas stations shouldn't have to be required to buy a generator. Every gas station, in my view, I hope I didn't sign it because it doesn't sound like something that I would sign. Listen, you can't prepare for every contingency, and you don't want to put the burden, in my view, on the private sector to have to do that. So we've made money available for generators, generator adaptability, which is really the biggest problem. It was not a lack of generators. It was that you didn't have the adaptability at the gas station to be able to plug the generator in, because it's not just, a regular plug into the wall, to run the pumps. So I know that we've done things to help for adaptability there and given Sandy money, government money, to gas stations to be able to prepare for that adaptability. So our problem was not that we didn't have enough generators. We had plenty of generators. The problem, because we brought them in from other states, National Guard brought them in from other states, the federal government airlifted generators to us. So we had plenty of generators, but many, if not most of the gas stations couldn't use them because they didn't have the adaptability. We thought that was the much better way to go, rather than to require them to buy a generator, which was going to be very expensive, which we could supply them if we needed to, via the government in the case of an emergency, which, if that's what happens this time, we'll definitely do that. And we know that we can go not only to the National Guard in New Jersey and in the area, but also to surrounding states and ultimately to DOD, all of which supply generators to us to help. We use those mostly in the human services and health areas to keep people who were the most vulnerable of our citizens to be able to do dialysis, to be able to do the kind of medical treatment that we needed to do. But we can supply them to gas stations if they're ready for them. But I wouldn't have been in favor of it. I'm pretty sure, I gosh hope I didn't sign one that required them to buy generators. I don't think I did. All right, so you've all been through this drill before, or maybe not all of you, but some of you have, at least. Although, come to think of it, there are only a few familiar faces here from 3 years ago in Sandy. So you know the way this works. We'll be talking to you frequently. I'll be talking to you frequently. And we'll continue to keep you apprised of what's going on in terms of our plans and preparedness and in terms of the track of the storm in conjunction with the National Weather Service. When they give that information, we'll be able to also tell you what it means for us in terms of evacuations, Phil, or any of the other decisions that we might have to make. So we'll keep in touch with you. I hope we don't get to spend nearly as much quality time together as we did 3 years ago at the Rock in West Trenton, even though it's a wonderful place, Colonel. But you know, if for a windowless building, it's fabulous. So hope we don't get to spend as much time there together as we did 3 years ago, not only for our sakes, but for the sakes of the people of the state. So again, to the people of the state, go to the website, print out your checklist, do the things you need to do, get ready, especially our 4 counties, Cape May, Atlantic, Salem, Cumberland. Let's get attentive to that now, today. Get yourselves ready. We'll keep in touch with you, your local and county elected officials, to let them know exactly what needs to be done. And as I said in response to your question, don't panic. Be prepared, but don't panic. We're ready. We'll be ready to deal with whatever comes. We'll keep an eye on the storm, but get ready for what's coming, you know, tonight and tomorrow in those 4 southern counties, because that's well before Joaquin, and something that's could have a significant impact from a moderate to major flooding situation. So let's be ready to deal with that. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you again soon.